In this video, we will talk about something that, whether we like it or not, impacts us all: social media. In this video, we will cover the impact of social media on dietetics due to the algorithm, engaging on social media as a dietitian, social media's impact on our clients, and navigating conversations with clients about social media and nutrition misinformation. If you aren't familiar with the Dietitian Success Center Instagram account, we primarily post funny and eye-catching posts that are relatable to dietitians, share in the struggles, as well as advocate for dietitians. Our big goal on social media is to help dietitians not feel so alone in their challenges and goals in the profession. We also use YouTube, of course, for our long-form educational videos. So let's get into it. As healthcare professionals, many of us are aware of the risks of social media and the negative aspects of it. But unfortunately, it is a big part of our society in this day and age, and it's important to understand what is happening on social media and how to navigate it as a dietitian. Because even if you're not on social media, your clients are. Before the days of social media, most people were exposed to roughly the same nutrition information at roughly the same time. It came through shared channels, commercials for public health campaigns, magazines, cookbooks, healthcare providers, real life conversations, maybe TV segments. Now, most people are learning about nutrition from algorithm driven platforms, and that means something important for us as dietitians. By the time a client meets with a dietitian, they've likely already gone down a bit of a rabbit hole. They've watched a few videos, clicked on related content, read comments, and the algorithm keeps feeding them more of the same. So, for example, they might watch one recipe video that happens to mention that the recipe is seed oil free. And now every scroll tells them that seed oils are the root of all their problems. And the reason that echo chamber forms is because of how the algorithm works. These platforms aren't built to sort information by accuracy. They're built to keep people on the app. So the system pays attention to what you pause on, what you like, what you share, what you comment on, and then gives you more of that. Content that sparks emotion tends to perform best. Things that feel urgent, definitive, things that offer a clear villain or a clear solution. The evidence is evolving, it doesn't keep people watching. What spreads is content that feels simple, confident, and certain. So, if someone is exposed to that repeatedly day after day, it's not surprising that it starts to feel like consensus. Not because everyone agrees, but because that's all they're being shown. So, we're no longer the first exposure to nutrition information. We might be the millionth exposure they've had in 1 week. And that shift changes the dynamic. We're now seeing nutrition trends spread faster than professional guidelines can respond. You've probably seen this in your own practice, whether it's confusion around medications, strong opinions about certain foods or ingredients, or trending diets that promise to fix very complex issues. By the time professional organizations release a statement, millions of people have already formed opinions. So the issue isn't just misinformation, it's the scale and speed. And that has real public health implications. If you are on social media, either as a creator or a consumer, it can feel discouraging when we see that an evidence based educational post by a dietitian doesn't perform as well as something that's figuratively louder, that perhaps is spreading misinformation. Because, unfortunately, the metrics on social media views, likes, shares reward clarity and confidence. So let's talk about how we can use social media as dietitians. So if you use social media in some way, that might mean you're posting, it might mean you're commenting on other people's posts, it might mean you're sharing articles, or it might simply mean that you're paying attention and trying to support accounts that are putting thoughtful information out there. Or maybe you just like watching funny cat videos. As dietitians, it's important that when we use social media professionally, we are using it intentionally and not reactively. Because whether we like it or not, what dietitians do on social media contributes to how the public understands our profession. When dietitians enter online conversations, we're often stepping into spaces that reward speed and certainty. Evidence based nutrition care, on the other hand, usually rewards careful thinking. And that tension creates a pressure. Pressure to respond quickly, pressure to know everything, pressure to simplify, or pressure to take a strong stance. Maybe you keep coming up against the same topic by your clients, and you're tired of replying to that same misinformation. And then you see a post about it on Facebook or Instagram. Part of you wants to jump into the comments and clarify things. Or maybe you do have a social media presence, and you're thinking, I should probably make a post about this because my patients are clearly seeing it. Or maybe it's more personal. You're scrolling through a local Facebook group and someone you know is confidently sharing something that's not quite right. And you feel that pull to respond. Those moments are where this tension lives. And one of the most helpful shifts you can make is slowing yourself down in those moments. Before you react or comment or post or jump in, ask yourself, am I responding because this genuinely needs context and a response? Or am I responding because I feel irritated? Or am I responding because I feel responsible for correcting all misinformation? Pausing here changes the tone of what comes next. It's also important to consider the audience. Online, you're rarely speaking just to the person in the comment thread. You're speaking to everyone reading along quietly. Let's say someone posts that a certain food destroys your hormones, and it gets a lot of agreement in the comments. You might know that that statement is wrong and oversimplified, but if you jump in and respond looking to correct and solve the misinformation, it could start an argument that causes the audience to mistrust dietitians or think we're reactive. But you could also write something helpful without necessarily trying to change the person's mind. For example, you could say there's typically a lot of individual variability here. If someone is having food related symptoms, it's worth looking at the full picture with a registered dietitian. That comment isn't just for the original poster, it's for the 150 people scrolling through the thread who are trying to make sense of what they're reading and how it applies to them. Most of them won't reply to you, but they will read it. But it's also important to have boundaries. It can start to feel like you're responsible for correcting every misleading post you see, especially when you care about public health. And when you're seeing the downstream effects of misinformation in your actual practice. The volume online is endless, and most misinformation doesn't spread because no one corrected it. It spreads because the platform rewards repetition and emotion. Jumping into every thread won't solve that. In fact, constantly reacting can pull you into conversations that aren't productive, and it can slowly drain the energy you need for your real work. Or the other side of this is if you are posting on social media. You might share something thoughtful and measured, and then suddenly your direct message folder fills up. People start sending you their lab results, their medication lists, long descriptions of symptoms, questions that really require a full nutrition assessment. It can start to feel like your inbox has quickly turned into a second clinic. This is where boundaries matter. Keeping responses general is appropriate. Redirecting someone to their own provider when things become individualized makes sense. Letting a message sit unanswered if it's outside of what you can reasonably address. Engaging online doesn't automatically make you available around the clock. You get to decide how accessible you are in that space. Your capacity is not unlimited. The most meaningful work you're doing is happening offline, in patient conversations, in team discussions, in the way you consistently explain complex topics in a grounded way. Sometimes your contribution online could be amplifying a colleague's work rather than creating your own response. Sometimes it's deciding not to step into a debate that isn't going to move anywhere. Using social media well isn't about constant output. It's about being deliberate with your attention. Where you choose to put your energy will shape the kind of presence you have both online and in your actual practice. But after all of this talk about boundaries and energy and caution, we don't want it to sound like the safest option is silence. There is real value in dietitians being visible online. Many of us were trained to be careful, to avoid saying the wrong thing, to stay within our scope, to make sure everything is perfectly worded. And that caution makes sense. We are regulated health professionals. But sometimes that caution can turn into hesitation. And when qualified professionals hesitate, the space doesn't stay empty, it just gets filled with louder voices. When dietitians do speak online, it shows what evidence-informed care looks like. It shows that we can explain complex topics in a clear way. It shows that professionalism and personality can exist together. So now that we've covered how to engage with social media, let's shift to what happens when we're working with clients who are getting information from social media. What most dietitians are increasingly seeing in practice is that clients arrive with very formed beliefs. Often these clients have spent a lot of time trying to make sense of their symptoms online before they even come to see you. Sometimes they bring screenshots or social media posts to show you. And sometimes they bring a lot of confidence in what they've seen. You might start to feel defensive or more pressure to know everything about this topic, or give fast answers. And sometimes there's comparison happening between you and the influencer they've been following. That requires a slightly different counseling plan than it might have 10 years ago. So, how do we approach these situations? Sometimes it can be helpful to think about things from a high level and take from it what makes sense for you in your real life practice. It can help to have a structure in your mind. So, let's walk through this 4-step approach. The first step is to check in with your immediate reaction. It's normal to feel frustrated, want to respond with immediate correction, like, that's not how digestion works, or dismissive, like, I don't think that influencer is very credible. But this can unintentionally damage rapport. Instead, pause, take a deep breath, and remind yourself that the client is usually trying to solve a problem, not challenge your expertise. The second step is to get curious. Now, this doesn't mean asking something confrontational. Questions like, were they a dietitian or was that on TikTok? You can ask genuine questions to get to the root of why the client was seeking out the information in the first place or how it appeared in their algorithm. You could ask something like, what stood out to you about that? Or what are your thoughts on that? The third step is to separate out the concern from the claim. Often there's something very real underneath the question. It could be fear, fatigue, frustration, or a feeling of being dismissed previously. For example, if someone is asking about a detox diet, the deeper issue might be that they feel out of control with their food choices. But if we only focus on correcting the claim, we may miss the underlying concern and the feelings that are underneath. The final step is to get back to what dietitians do best: individualized care. Looking at the client in front of you and what their unique nutrition needs are. For example, maybe you've determined that they are drawn to low-carb diets because they're feeling anxious about a potential diabetes diagnosis. The next step is to help sort out what their unique nutrition needs are, and then maybe you can help walk them through strategies that could regulate their blood sugars in the form of foods that will actually fit with their life and taste preferences. So you might say something like, that approach may work for some people. Let's look at how it would fit with your nutrition goals. Can you walk me through what a typical day of eating looks like for you? And then from there, you can build a plan together. That reinforces something that social media cannot offer: personalization. And that's where our value as dietitians becomes very clear. Let's go through an example. Imagine a client comes into your session and says, I've been seeing a lot of TikToks about the acid alkaline diet and how certain foods create inflammation and cortisol face. So I've been trying to eat mostly alkaline foods and cut out things like grains, dairy, and some fruits. You might notice your immediate reaction. Maybe part of you wants to say, that's not really how our body regulates pH. Or, those influencers all use beauty filters anyway. Instead, step 1 is that pause. Take a breath and remind yourself the client is usually trying to solve a problem. Step 2 is curiosity. You might ask, what was it about those videos that caught your attention? And the client might respond, they were saying if your diet is too acidic, it can increase cortisol and inflammation. I've been feeling really stressed lately, and I've noticed my face looks puffier than the other women my age on TikTok. So I thought maybe this could help. So now we can move into step 3, separating the concern from the claim. The claim is about the acid alkaline diet, but the concern underneath is stress, how they're feeling in their body, and maybe some worries about changes in their appearance, and comparing themselves to people online. So instead of focusing the entire conversation on debating the science of the diet, you can acknowledge the underlying concern. You might say something like, that makes sense. When you're feeling stressed or noticing changes in your body, it's really normal to start looking for ways to feel more in control. And then step 4 is bringing the conversation back to individualized care. You could say something like, why don't we start by looking at the bigger picture of what's going on right now? Can you walk me through what your eating pattern has looked like lately? From there, the conversation might move into how much mental energy they're spending trying to follow strict food rules, what their stress levels are like day to day, and whether the current approach is helping them feel better or more overwhelmed. And sometimes the realization becomes that the rigid diet itself may be contributing to stress rather than solving it. But because you approach the conversation with curiosity instead of correction, the client stays engaged in the process. And that's often what makes the biggest difference. Now, this all sounds great in theory, but a very real question is what this looks like when you don't have much time. Because in some settings, you might only have 15 to 20 minutes, and nutrition is just one piece of their visit. So instead of thinking about this as 4 distinct steps, it can help to think about it as one quick flow that happens in a much more condensed way. And something interesting here is that this approach can actually save you time. Because when we go straight into a full scientific explanation, it can sometimes open up a longer back and forth and creates more resistance if the client feels shut down. Rather, taking a moment to understand where they're coming from often makes the conversation more direct and easier to guide. So, a shortened version might sound like pausing quickly, asking one question, acknowledging what's underneath, and bringing it back to the client. Let's walk through a speed round example. Imagine you're seeing a client in an outpatient cancer clinic. You only have 15 minutes for their nutrition consult. And the client says, I've been seeing a lot on Facebook about cutting out sugar to stop cancer growth, so I've been trying to avoid all carbs. You might notice that initial reaction come up, that urge to over-explain or to correct them. So instead, you take that quick pause, and then you move into curiosity, but in a simple way. What have you been hearing about that? The client might say, that sugar is bad when you have cancer, so I figured I need to overhaul my diet to get rid of the sugar. And in a shorter session, this is where that idea of separating the claim from the real concern becomes helpful. Because the claim is about sugar and cancer, but the concern underneath is something else. For example, in this case, it sounds like it's a sense of wanting to do something to support their health at a time when they feel out of control. So instead of focusing your time on correcting the claim, you can acknowledge what's underneath. That makes sense. When you're hearing things like that, it's very normal to want to make changes and feel like you're doing everything you can. And then from there, you can bring it back to the client. You can guide the conversation toward helping them see that getting enough nutrition is the priority right now, and that being more restrictive may not actually support them in the way that they're hoping. But because you've taken a moment to understand what's driving the question, that shift feels more natural and easier for the client to hear without needing a long explanation. You haven't ignored what they said, you haven't gone into a long-winded explanation, but you've still paused, understood their perspective, acknowledged their concern, and brought it back to individualized care, all within a short window of time. And often that's enough to keep the conversation grounded and productive, even in a time-limited setting. Let's end on something practical, because algorithms, misinformation, shifting trust is interesting to talk about, but what actually matters is what happens in your clinic room at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when someone pulls out their phone and says, I saw this on Instagram. And something that can help in the moment is having somewhere you can turn to feel like you can give the client something so that you can take that moment to pause and collect your thoughts or do some reading after the session. This is where we at Dietitian Success Center can provide support and help you get more out of your membership by using our resources in these tricky situations. Not in a here's a perfect script way, but in a you don't have to reinvent this every time way. For example, if you know you have a client coming in to talk about something you're not comfortable with, sometimes it can help to do a bit of preparation ahead of time. Maybe you watch a video course to prep, read an evidence summary, skim a practitioner resource, or review our counseling program before the session just to refresh the key points so you're not relying on memory alone. Sometimes the moment happens right in the session. A client brings up something like raw milk, seed oils, or a supplement they saw on Instagram. And you don't necessarily need to have every detail ready on the spot. It's completely reasonable to say something like, this is a big topic. I actually have a handout about this. Let me send that to you after our session so you have something accurate to look through. Having something tangible to give a client can be really helpful. It slows the conversation down and gives them a chance to reflect on the information outside of the appointment, instead of trying to process everything in the moment. Or maybe you leave an appointment thinking, I want to double check the evidence around that before our follow-up. So you can post in our free dietitian community. There are moments in practice where you leave a session thinking, did I handle that conversation in the best way? Or how are other dietitians approaching this trend right now? Being able to talk through those situations with other dietitians can be reassuring. Just hearing how someone else navigated a similar conversation can help you feel less stuck the next time it happens. Having tools, resources, and other dietitians to lean on just helps take some of that pressure off. You can access all of this and more as a Dietitian Success Center practitioner member. And you can get started for free as a free starter kit member, which also gives you access to our dietitian community. To wrap up, social media isn't going anywhere. Our clients will keep encountering new ideas, new trends, and new claims about nutrition. That's just the environment we're practicing in now. But what social media can't replace is the work that happens in real conversations between a client and a dietitian. It can't personalize information. It can't ask follow up questions. It can't understand someone's history, preferences, culture, and lifestyle. That's the part of the work that belongs to you. And when those social media conversations show up in your office, which they inevitably will, sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is exactly what dietitians already do so well: pause, get curious, help the client sort through what they've seen, and bring the conversation back to what actually matters for them. Thanks for watching.